Okay, brilliant. So we're going to get started with our second panel, where we have two textile artists who work with new media and all sorts of other things. And I think it's a lovely opportunity that they're paired together. I couldn't think of a better combination. I feel like a little bit of an imposter in this event. I'm not a disciplinary specialist in anything, art, dance, textiles. I'm a modern linguist and I work on Latin America. And the connection is that I discovered Aruma, or Sandra's work, when she was involved in an art project creating, it was an electronic art project in indigenous communities in Brazil. So I first found out about your work about a year and a half ago, and I have been waiting for the opportunity to actually meet her, and this is the very first time. So I'm absolutely delighted that she's here, and she's going to tell us all a little bit more about her work. She tells me that this is the first time that she's giving a formal presentation in English, and she's going to do her very best, but actually we know that she can do it very well. Yes? Okay, thank you. And I'll wave at you.
Hi, my name is Aruma. I will present to you today briefly some aspect of my research through example of Andean textile technologies and tools and some of my artworks. I will start talking about the Southern Cross, a constellation that has been represents and presents since ancient times in the iconography of weaves. And this constellation was reflected in designs since the first textile techniques and wet faces, fabric, and subsequently also in scarf stones. The particularity is the Southern Cross was always presented in a square structure, and the reason is that the ancient inhabitants of Southern America calculated that the Southern Cross shows the perfect composition of a square. It is to say, the smaller arm of the Southern Cross is the side of a square, and the smaller arm is the Southern Cross of the Southern Cross is the side of the square, whose diagonal is the major arm. So it is the major arm and is exactly the diagonal of any square. The square is the basis of the Andean design. The tocapus, which are considered the Andean script, are also based on the square. The whole distribution of this ritual mantle called unku and tapestry based in the square is based in the square as well. Knowing this, it's possible to identify parallels between the QR code and the pre-Columbian textile technique called kelim, used hundreds of years back in the Wari Tiahuanaco culture. This is a work of mine that maybe someone of you can read this with the it can be the code with applications that are installed on cell phones or computers. As you know, the quick response code is used to store information in a matrix based on the square. So who is able to decode these textiles is allowed to make a virtual tour by places of ancient textile tradition, as an Agyawasi, the place where the women were weaving all the time. Somebody can decode?
Isla del Sol.
Yeah, you can do a virtual tour. It's an ancient weaver place. With the above example, we can have the first look on the importance between the Andean, within an Andean weave structure. Despite that, many still think that an Andean textile is only an utilitarian or decorative element. Certainly, there is something more complex inside. Because a textile is not read like a book. It's definitely not a book. It's rather similar to the concept to the black box of Wilhelm Flusser when refers to technological devices, like a projector in which we recognize a very clear function, but we don't know how it works mostly of the time, except for its output. The input is the signal that I send in with the computer to the projector, and the output is the image that we are seeing. The same happened with the fabrics. At first glance, we don't access the intrinsic complexity of this program. That is, we don't see how information flows within it. Agreeing with Victoria Mitchell, thinking in textile just as iconography means to forget other dimensions that are certainly not inside. Only the fact of looking at the reverse of the textiles activates a series of questions. She is my neighbor, my teacher Paulina Garcia Condori. She is my age, speaks Quechua, and taught me how to weave this complex technique that she learned from her grandmothers. Here, she's showing us how a loom operates. This technique, also called kurti in the Andean zone, is about two clothes or contrasting colors that are woven simultaneously. This technique is very versatile to make designs, and when weaving it shows us that it's a functioning system itself. Hello world is the first phrase that the programmers use when a system is working. This is a very simple scheme on the result of this fabric. In this image, there is no design. There is a plain fabric on both sides. And in this other, when we fabric intercross, the design appears. In our faced technique, the web remains hidden. Next, a scheme made by Annie Albers, member of the Bauhaus, dedicated to the research and practice of the loom. In her book on weaving, which was dedicated to the master weavers of ancient Peru, describes how she tried to do a kind of reverse engineering to understand the way to make patterns in the pre-Hispanic way. recognizing the complexity of those textile extractors. In fact, it's very difficult to do reverse engineering in an Andean loom, since when it is finished, auxiliary sticks are removed, the handles, shed rods, swords. Once the fabric is finished, all this disappears. That is to say, important information disappears as well. Paulina is using 2 weak chuñas, llama bones, to finish a weave. This is kind of information that we never, we are not able to see. Here is a small loom in which 3 fabrics are interwoven: orange, pink, and green. This complexity is due to the fact that we are talking about a soft machine that works at the speed of thinking. Exist in it logical sequences, algorithmic reasoning, and components that make it work. It is necessary to calculate, and also an extraordinary feat of mathematical memory as well, manual skill. The result is colorful dream beams or helicopters in contrast with the landscape. It is important to emphasize another feature of this technology, its portable aspect. The weaver can easily take her loom anywhere. Roll and unroll the fabric, look for support from a tree, where the weaver connects the top of the loom and the lower end to her waist. So when you weave, you need to do some movements in order to adjust the correct tension, and you become part of the loom with this movement. And actually you are connected to the environment as well. And as you see in this braid process called ñawi, it's usual to use tools that were collected along the way, like little sticks. And also on the way, the weavers prepares the thread with a simple instrument such as spindle. Spindle gives the correct torsion required for each fabric type, accumulating at the bottom of the thread while served as counterweight. The interesting is that the same movement that makes the spindle is the same one by which the sun emanates or expels energy. It is a rotational force called torque, which contains and accumulates energy. And when it relays, eddy chairs that produce spirals expand in space. When we spindle, we do that. What the spindle does is generate some movement of torque, that same movement of torque, but instead of throwing it into space, it accumulates that energy, it stores it inside the thread and contains it there. This image is just to visualize what tangles would look like in terms of energy. Beyond the visualization, the same tangle can be lit with a mechanical spinning wheel and a dynamo. I have some video with an mechanical spindle. I lost the sound, but the sound is wall working. Here the mechanical energy is converted into electrical energy, so we can observe the power of the twist of the threads. There are other ways to relate the textile and its process to energy forms. This is one slope of saline water called in Quechua colpa, used since ancient times as a mordant for dyes. If you simply connect a multimeter of it, it gives a 1.1 volt. These simple experiments make us think about the electrochemical power of natural dyes. This is the airampo, or Puntia cochabambiensis, dyer cactus, which is used to dye wool with different tones of purple. Electric circuit connected to the cactus with LEDs are used as basic electronic exercise, and in the darkness of the night, it is possible to visualize the energy that it contains. While I worked many years of research on natural dyes, the premise was to find the strongest dye, and it was about the art of fixing colors. In Latin, the art of dyeing is called ars fixi, the art of fixing, the art of permanence. But what if the dyes are subject to another more volatile experience, to a more conductive experiences? If appropriate connections are made and the dye is applied, and a small control electric discharge is applied to a conductive material inserted inside the tissue structure, we can see how the dye reveals its spectrum, and that is its chemical composition is split into essential compounds, slowly revealing the sequence of colors that make it up, a kind of chromatography. In this series, Electrochemical Variation, I delve into experimentation between acidic and alkaline mediums, thinking about the electronic potentialities of the natural dye. I think it's airampo dye, the cactus. These electrochromatographic experiences were recorded in video pieces, also capturing the color reactions at microscopic level. Thanks to a hack webcam, we can see this image. The same reaction, but in microscopic level. After making many experiences with different dyes, it was interesting to change the scale and to think that the same element and those same reactions may be happening in other parts of the universe on a larger scale. As we know, light and its color decomposition are information about the world around us, from alert on the temperature to revealing the chemical composition of distant stars. Light is energy, which travels very fast, and one of the best transmitters is fiber optics that allows light to travel long distances faster than it does by wires. It's a fiber thinner than a human hair. It is covered by transparent nylon with different degrees of flexibility and resistance. It can be combined with other fibers, woven in backstrap loom, with traditional tools. There is some experiences. Doing some kind of media technology, I made this work series which I wove a technique from Chimu and Chancay cultures. There is a pre-Hispanic technique, is not woven anymore. This technique has the peculiarity to be warp and wet faced at the same time. This technique was useful to weave an optical fiber with great thickness, because when woven in this way, the optical fiber remains in a straight way. That is to say, it prevents breaking and curling, and achieving a detailed design. Here's a bit of the process of that ancient technique applied. The loom in the day and at night. By keeping the fiber in a straight line prevents breakage, but at the same time maintain a smooth transmission of light. Here more examples with the other weave techniques. The darker the environment, the greater the luminosity. So in the darkness of the native forest, we will have some visitors. There is a detail, and generally these works are connected to sensors, trying to look for some interactivity with people, and thinking within the colored weaves from Bolivia. Some other examples. Installations. The loom and the forest near to my home. Weave is a technology that uses energy contained and accumulates in each of these its fibers. That is what goes on the deep weave. Weave is a soft technology to see, understand, and align us with the plant. This is an example on how we start. We now weaving the stars in Bolivia, but it's at the same time an example how we can insert some other components like electrical components and LEDs inside the structures of the weaving. And we still weaving stars. Thank you very much as well.
Sorry for my wild English. I think it was eminently comprehensible and beautifully illustrated as well. Does anybody have a question for Arima before our next speaker? Or maybe I can ask just one question, which is, what do your neighbours think of it? Because your neighbours are teaching you the traditional weaving techniques, and then you go and do this kind of wild stuff with it. How do they react to it?
Actually, they like a lot, and in the right moment, they want to do something. They are looking for some things with electricity, but I think the project that that you are part, that
indigenous electronic art.
Indigenous electronic art. It was really interesting in this sense, because the mix of the techniques, at the same time the similarity in the techniques was is really a topic to work with the neighbors, with the indigenous peoples from other countries. It's kind of a similar language, I guess.
So a bridging device.
Yeah, it's not. It's at the first glance is look some kind of different thing, but when you go deep, you can see the similarities, I guess.
Okay. So shall we move on to our next speaker now, and then we'll carry on the conversation at the end.
Perfect.
So
it's better to. You will connect.
So moving on to our second speaker on the panel, Toni Buckby also works with textiles and interactive digital technologies, and in particular specialises in hand-stitched embroidery with a particular focus on the 16th century technique of blackwork. Which I have to say I'm completely unfamiliar with, so I'm really hoping to learn a lot.
I'm not actually talking about
You're
that
not?
today.
Oh,
No,
well,
I'm talking about a small side project that suddenly got bigger than me.
Okay,
So
I'll have to ask you about that at lunchtime.
You can ask me about that. That's what my PhD is in, is in
Okay.
blackwork, but I'm not talking about embroidery today.
Brilliant, okay. More about then the Interlace project. Thank you.
Hello, yes, so this is the Interlace project. This was, as I said, a very small side project that I started in 2017 and has now sort of grown into a very large side project. It was a commission for this place, which is the Darby Silk Mill Museum, if anybody's familiar with that. It's on the River Derwent, and it's an industrial museum on the site of the world's first factory, or so they claim, and it was for silk spinning. There's some wonderful stories about espionage, them bringing the spinning technology over. But it's currently closed down. They've got a very, very large Heritage Lottery Fund budget, and they're currently doing a massive sort of rebuild and restructuring. And one of the things that they've been doing is they've been bringing artists in to sort of run research projects, because they're very, very interested in having a lot of community engagement, artist outreach, and the other thing that they've got in here is a makerspace. And I work down at Access Space, which is another makerspace. So in 2017, I put in for a project grant, very small one, to do this thing called the Interlace project. And my entire idea was to design open source weaving tools, because anybody who's looked into weaving, the tools can be quite prohibitively expensive. So the entire idea was that I would make some kits, put the files out open source, but they could also be produced in their makerspace, and then they could use the tools in educational outreach. So this was, I've only done two so far. This is a laser cut rigid heddle loom. And a rigid heddle loom is just a very, very simple shaft loom. It's all in one, so you have your warp and weft threads, and they go through a slot and a dot. You raise them up and down, but you also use that as a beater. It's a very, very simple tool. And the whole idea was that you could laser cut the parts, and all of the kit you can buy from B&Q, places like that. I kept it, apart from those screws. You have to go to Screwfix to get those because they're winter metal screws. But everything is sort of easily available. Yeah, all the files are up on Instructables. You want to go on there? 17,000 views so far, which is quite nice. So I did this one, which is a little bit more complicated, but the first one I actually designed was this little thing here. And I have got a stack of them down there if anybody would like to take one. These are the little mini frame looms. And I sort of designed them to be about that big, and it was just for the idea of teaching really basic weaving to kids. So what they are is they're stick weaving looms, nothing so complicated as these backstrap things. The whole idea is that instead of having complicated heddles, you use 3 sticks, and then you actually do the weaving action by moving the sticks about. And it's really, really good. They're tiny, they're great for sort of small hands. And the first time I took a kit of these out was to the Darby Mini Maker Faire, 2017, yeah. And I was sat in the Maker Faire, and they put me in these, got to my table, and I was next to the man with the Minecraft Raspberry Pis. And I looked at him with his projectors and thought, no one's going to come and look at my weaving. And I didn't even have time for lunch that day. I taught 80 kids how to weave in about 6 hours. So they were quite popular, very popular with the parents as well. There's something about, suddenly the kids go really quiet, and yeah, they seem to like them. So I've sort of done them all over the place. So this is actually, I went to Coventry and did some in a pop-up cafe there. And here's some samples of the things that people make. So it just produces little tiny pieces. The other thing that I've been doing with it is I work with electronic textiles, and I'm particularly interested in creating capacitive surfaces. So I've got this idea that when you go to museums and things like that, you see textiles, you want to touch them. So I want to make works that you are supposed to touch. I'm sort of quite into that. So we run conductive thread through it. It's not particularly complicated. The thread can be a little bit fiddly to work with depending on what type you get. So we just weave these backwards and forwards. I don't have any video because it's quite boring, but you get the idea. So you touch it, it basically works like you touch your mobile phone. And we did some of that. And then what we can do is, if you take them to workshops, we put them all up into big boxes, hooks and little NeoPixels. This is all just DIY electronic stuff. People sit, they do the weaving, run the thread through, and then they can look it up and the lights go off. And kids are absolutely delighted by this. Where are we? So earlier this year, I was asked to scale this up. So I was approached by Raw, which are an arts organisation over in Rotherham, and they wanted a big version. So we had this large frame loom made up. I learned a lot about frame looming weaving that week. So just some images of that. And I also learned quite a lot about doing capacitive sensing on that kind of scale, which is stuff that I've been applying to your work this week, because getting it to work's been a pain. And that was actually a really, really nice place to do it, because we were in the food court on Rotherham Market, and these are places that normally they don't sort of have art events and things like that, and I really quite like the idea of taking art projects to people that wouldn't normally approach gallery spaces and things like that. There seems to be a sort of idea that art spaces are not for people that go shopping in the market, but it doesn't mean they're not interested. And I spent a whole week just talking to people, and they were telling me their stories about how their parents used to work in mills, and so it was really, really nice. And yeah, I'm kind of very, very into that idea of sort of simple stuff, take it to people and let them do what they want with it. Some other tests of capacitance. I have been trying to get XY positioning working, and I might have to look at some of the weaving techniques you've been talking about. So XY positioning, in order to get it to operate like a touch screen in 3 dimensions, you need it to be able to track touches on that level and touches on that level. So you use a grid, and that's basically all that's in your mobile phone. The problem you have with standard weaving is that your warps, your ups and downs, and your wefts, left to right, they cross. So if you then touch at any point, you'll get a short circuit. So it's about being able to run those warp threads and weft threads so you can weave them into a grid, but without actually letting the conductive thread touch. I'm not an advanced enough weaver to be able to do it. I am an embroidery artist though, so I did one with embroidery. That worked quite nicely. And the reason that I want to do this is why I said this project has now got bigger than me. It started off as this very sort of simple little project. It's now turned into a very big commission for the museum next year. So what this is going, it's reopening in, it's meant to be the summer, I think it's been put back to the autumn, but this is going to be a large installation. Because it used to be a silk spinning factory, they're based on silk cocoons, very abstract silk cocoons, and each one of these little shapes is made from a flat panel, which is cut and woven, just frame looms like I've been working with, and then we flatten them down, we take them out to community groups, and then it's the community groups that do the weaving, and then we'll put them together, but they'll have the conductive thread running through. So the whole idea is that it's a sculpture that people are supposed to touch, and because it's been made by community groups, if it gets a bit worn out, we can get other community groups in to come and fix it. The other cool thing that I'm trying to work out how to do is I kind of want this to be modular. So it's basically a whole big bunch of complicated switches, but it's just on and off. So I'm going to try and get it to output just signals that other artists can then use, and use it as an interface, and then I'm hoping that the museum will be up for commissioning other people to come and work and do fun things with it, because it can do all sorts. You can play music, sounds, I'm doing haptic feedback things, you can do lots of stuff. I think that's pretty much it. It's quite a short talk. That's my contacts if anybody wants that. I like to keep the talks short, so no heavy theory here.
Shall we all go back up to the table as the previous panel did?
Should we get some? Let's get a nice weaving picture up. There we go.
Yeah, I really liked what you were talking about the fact that you want people to touch the things that you make.
Yeah.
I think that's really. I mean, the times that I've been most impressed at art exhibitions are when children are totally engaged with art that's otherwise being displayed largely for adults.
Yeah, I think the idea of delight is one that's greatly overlooked sometimes, and there's just something about making wonderful things that can interact with. And whenever I go to museums, because I'm being funded by a museum, so I'm sort of really interested in how museum display works, and I'm always watching children. And if the kids are enjoying it, then I think there's something in there. And there's a wonderful one that's in the museum at the moment where they've got the flow projectors onto the floor. And you can never, I've never actually been in to get a good look at it because it's just full of kids.
Yeah.
And it's great.
Yeah. And if you've got an art exhibition that was designed for adults, and they are, I think it was Gormley's The Field, which of course, you know, you couldn't go in and touch all those little terracotta statues, and children were crying at the door, you know, because they just wanted to get in and play, and that's when I knew that potentially it was successful if only you had allowed that kind of dimension. But yeah, and particularly the community dimension in the works that you do. Yeah. I think that's really, really interesting.
It's all about sharing, and you know, people generally are very positive and very interested. So I'm not precious about anything I make particularly. I'd rather have people take it away and do something fun with it. So.
Can I open it up to other people to ask questions? Yes.
Sandra, you said that you sometimes involve sensors in your work as
Yeah.
well. How do they affect the outcome? How do people use them when they're interacting?
Actually, we will show after the symposium and big weave with 3.5 meters long, with almost 300 sticks of copper sticks, like you say, the metals are really conductive, and you can insert in the structure of the weave, and with the connecting with the sensors and with the right voltage.
Yeah, you've got to up the
around.
voltage. It took me ages to work how long we could do that without electrocuting people.
You can program the way like you want, like an interface. And in this case, in the gallery, is a sound textile. You can touch the patterns, and it's my time to say thank you to Alex, who did the sound programming, and Toni, who makes the capacitance debugging of the this big piece. You can be able to touch it today at the gallery. It's a kind of publicitary space.
Yeah, capacitance is fine if you're working on small scales, but as soon as you start working large, it starts getting really, really, really difficult to work with. So yeah, we worked it out. It was fun.
Yeah, the key was the electricity running around the whole system that is and with something.
I should say that I also have one of your pulse sensors in my bag from another piece of art that Atrium produced when we were from the Brazilian project. The thing that I'm always struck by when I'm sort of looking at what's going on in the UK and then looking at Latin America is the way that we seem to have a kind of a post-industrial re-engagement with crafting. That, of course, isn't the case when I'm looking at artworks produced in Latin America, which, I don't have a real question about that, but I think it's really interesting the way that we're trying to sort of move beyond our industrial heritage and to kind of find ways to pull it back towards something that sort of we can deal with as a sort of an art, a craft form.
Yeah, I think there has been for ages, but this sort of rise to sort of start making again. It's amazing the amount that we've forgotten how to do. So we were talking about drop spindles the other day. Now I can use one, but I had to learn to use one 2 years ago. Whereas you were saying you've taught to do that when you're little. It's just not something we would have been taught anymore. So I think there is kind of that rise. I find it interesting that a lot of the places where these sort of projects are happening now are the ex-industrial textiles that are now being turned into museums, and now they're doing these sorts of projects.
So could weaving be a way of, in terms of sort of education, or in terms of interaction of knowing through electricity, as it were? Is there a way in which weaving, which is very much kind of silk or wool or whatever it is, through the optic fibre, I understand that it lights up, but and so perhaps one is then led to ask questions as to what's going on. But is there a way of kind of, Toni, for you, of being able to introduce and talk about and engage?
Well, yeah, I mean, the kind of
knowledge about how impulses and
the sort of, it depends on what I get asked to go and do. So like I said, I get asked to do quite a lot of these community workshops, and a lot of the time it's about finding that balance between showing enough but not making it so complicated it blows people's mind, because some people don't know how code works. So depending on the workshop, sort of depends what I do. So I have pre-built boxes, and then it's quite sort of simple, hands-on. Anybody coming tomorrow, we will be doing some coding, and we'll be learning about how the circuits work. I really like the thing that you do, where you're actually weaving the circuit components. That's something I'm particularly, because as I said, weaving's kind of a secondary thing for me. I'm actually an embroiderer, and I do quite a bit with sort of embroidering circuits. I'm happier. Well, no, actually, I quite like soldering as well. So, what I'm doing quite a bit of work on at the moment is looking at the hard to soft connection points. So, because we've got hard electronic components, and then you've got these soft, floaty textiles, actually getting them to match up is proving quite interesting. I'm really, really into shrink tubing at the moment. That's kind of where I'm playing. But I wonder if particularly who was speaking earlier about actually making soft components. So maybe we're thinking about that kind of the wrong way, trying to make these textiles go to hard things. Maybe we should look at perhaps designing components, but I'm an artist, so it might be a bit beyond me.
I don't know much about this because I was a volunteer at Darby, so I didn't really see the label of action, but what do you think the gender implications are of mixing kind of weaving, which is more seen as like women's wear, and then sides, which is just something being historically male? And do you find that you have different reactions to weaving rather than other arts because it's being seen as more women's wear?
I'll respond to that while we translate. With those little frame looms, whenever I've done them, actually having the electronics element in has got more boys involved with doing weaving. So I've not really done because obviously you're running around trying to teach lots of kids how to weave at the same time. But there's actually a gender imbalance, and it tends to lean towards boys coming to do it because they kind of like, oh, there's crocodile clips and circuit boards and things. And then you sit them down to do the weaving, and because you say, well, we're going to run this stuff through it, and then you're going to be part of the circuit, and you sort of do a brief explanation of how the cap sensing works. And they'll sit there, and it's sort of dropping towards a lot more boys, and mums of hyperactive young boys. Have as many of these as you like. There you go. Take the looms home.
In respect of this question, I will say that in the ancient times the weave was a communitary work. The jobs were divided, and there were specialists in dye and weave, and there make and change of produce, and there was a master weaver that designed and to do that, and the gender was not the main thing. It was an communitary work, and the master weavers was indistinctly men or women.
Yeah, I think there's
it depends on the region. Sorry.
Yeah, that sort of gender divide is quite modern because I've been going to Bradford Industrial Museum. If you've never been there and you like weaving, go to the weaving floor and talk to Greg. He's a brilliant man. But when it was sort of cottage industries, it would be whole families involved. So it would normally be the men that did the weaving while the kids did the kids and the women did the carding and the spinning. And then even when you got to industrial level, it would be sort of, there wouldn't be that sort of, so I think there's kind of this modern, I think it's possibly the sort of rise of craft as a homespun concept, sort of nice hobbies for ladies, Victorian era, but before that, I know particularly with embroidery, the Broiders Guild, there was a lot of male embroiderers, and it depended on the type of embroidery, so women weren't allowed to do the gold ecclesiastical work, it was men that did that. So I think these ideas of sort of gendered textiles possibly need looking at, because I don't know that the historical basis that people assume actually does exist. It's a lot more nuanced.
I came across a Legotronics braiding machine on the internet the other day. So it's made of Lego, basically. The Legotronics is obviously a branch of Lego, and it was a braiding machine.
Yeah.
So I think that would be it's quite an interesting.
I keep a big box of Technics Lego in my studio, and if I'm designing new machines or tools, I always make it out of the Technics Lego first, just to make sure the mechanisms work. So.
Anybody else? Yes.
I was really interested in Sandra when you said that how information flows from textiles are invisible, and actually by looking at the reverse, that activates questions. And I remember Toni in a different context talking about embroidery and that actually having to look at the reverse of the embroidery to understand the various stitches are made. And I just wondered what part of the process of removing obfuscation in textiles, and also obviously like going understanding computation and what that allows you to achieve.
Well, it's like we've talked about before, it's, well, particularly with the embroidery, and I work with sort of 16th century embroidery. When you see the pieces in museums, you're looking at the front, and you can have a guess at how they're made, but now I'm doing my PhD with the V&A, I get to see the backs. And that's really interesting because it's on with embroidery particularly, often how the structure of the thing has been formed is completely, I mean, some of it is due to convention, but a lot of it you can spot. It's to do with the hand of the person that's done it. I know another researcher who is actually tracing different embroiderers through different items of 18th century, and she can spot their stitching like handwriting when she looks at the back. I'm not quite that good, but yeah, you can certainly see different hands, and a lot of it is to do with how they've worked the backs. But weaving is a sort of different form because it's
interlace.
Yeah.
And a particularity is this technique doesn't have knots. Any knot around this complex weave, it means that you need to have the right tension and another parameters to fix everything. And so to finish the weave is the most critical. To start and to finish is the most critical moment, because you need to end the weave in a square way with the four sides correctly. So this finish this side is almost to finish with a needle and millimetrical work, and so it's kind of signature of the weaver, the way how her or he ends the textile, and the information of the textile is multidimensional as well, because we need to think inside the structure. There is floating threads that we are not able to see. It's kind of mystery sometimes.
I just want to say how wonderful the way in which you managed to reach to the stars and were able to, these floating threads are somehow
You reached to the stars, and I'm sat on Rotherham Market on the floor.
So I just an observation about that wonderful way in which you can kind of sort of iconography, the potential narratives through which we can connect what we do with materials with our hands, with cultural knowledge, and I think that's really rich in both what you're both doing and incredibly valuable.
I think it's interesting just because weaving, embroidery, most textiles, they're so old, they're pretty much universal. That's the really interesting thing. So weavers from different cultures, I'm not a good weaver, but I understand enough, they can, even if they share no language, they can understand each other through the processes that they...
Would one work with magnets? So magnetism, I was thinking about magnetism, I'm wondering whether there's a sort of a branch of what you do which might engage in.
Yeah, I was looking at the people happening.
The little stitches of the iron filing.
For sure, it's a lot of observation, and I don't know if what your exact question.
Bueno, si puedes tejer con manos.
I never tried, but I was doing some experience with conductive, different kind of conductive materials. I like to experiment with the tensions of the thread that is energy, as what I showed. But one the things that I like to relate with the star is the way to be nomadic as in a way, because you can walk, we can be in different places, and you can still doing your work like a portable computer. It's kind of portable technology that you can work in anywhere. And in the case of the braiding, it's interesting that the weaver is part of the loom totally, because you can set the top of the braid with the top, and you are the whole system of the braid. You are part of the
your side.
Yeah, it's kind of you are incorporate the technology. You are part of the system of this technology. I like this.
So yeah, just kind of expanding on that, there's a kind of quite clear parallel there between the language of the loom and the reaction of the body of the weaver, and Kate's work earlier on creating this coding language, but for the dance to respond to
The tensions and the relax.
Tony, I'm really interested in your work, I guess, about the open source and the social side of the democratization of the tools. Have you had many people kind of go to the roads for weaving groups and actually use the tools and you have to choose?
I don't know. I'm assuming that somebody has. I know somebody contacted me and said, "Can I mess about with this so I can make them more efficient and go for your life?" Somebody had 60 off me for running a workshop. But yeah, the designs are on there, on Instructables. Help yourself. I really, this is sort of part of my research at the moment, is looking at the idea of sort of maker culture and what are the words gone? Collective making, and the idea of sort of being really free with your ideas so that other people can use them and remix them, and then what you get back is really interesting. I think it's sort of that idea of having the conversation. But yeah. Different paper.
I should both talking. I was thinking back to the way in which the event overall is framed through the Penelope project, which Alan and Alex are involved in, and this kind of subtitle of weaving as a technical malleable resistance. And then my own involvement in these projects, I guess some of the things I'm interested in is it's like sort of like what knowledge and principles are involved in these practices beyond the weaving itself. So it's sort of like what kinds of societies and communities and collectivities emerge through the practices of these skills, and how might that be important now? I mean, I think one of the challenges of the maker movement is there is somewhere embedded in it a nostalgic twist. So it's kind of also how can we avoid that nostalgic turn to really think
what can this offer in terms of kind of like a radical rethinking of how our societies are structured in a way?
Well, I think I think specifically here, because we're so used to, I mean, I trained as a fashion student, so I can make my own clothes, pattern cut. I don't have time, I can't be bothered, I go to Primark like everybody else. I think there's something about using these tools to sort of reflect on that kind of consumerism. I mean, it's quite an old sort of trope, that, but again, we're getting more, there's more issues about sustainability and things coming up at the moment. Why that one was particularly interesting, just because of the size of the thing. We did start using wool that we bought, and it wasn't going to get done in time because we only had 3 days. So we ended up getting lots of old rags. People were bringing in bags and bags, since it's all just made of stuff that people were bringing. And I think a lot of stuff is, I sound so old now, a lot of stuff is all done through screens at the moment, and I think there's something about getting people just to go, hang on, here's some stuff, feel it, pull the thing. I'm not going to sit there forcing people to have high convoluted conversations about critical theory over a brew while we're doing a bit of weaving, but the conversations that we do have, people do think about it while they're doing it, and oh, isn't this. So I don't know, that kind of talks around your question without directly answering it. But
I was also thinking a bit about the collective knowledge that you talked
yeah.
about. And I think this was very present in your talk, also some of this idea of the way in which we share knowledge, also through speaking to others.
Yeah.
Maybe something to do with the intimacy of the technology, and there was a particular mode of sharing in and through the fabric itself. I was thinking about this.
I think there's something to do with the speed of making textiles by hand, because it can't be done quickly. So, I mean, in my mind, weaving's pretty quick. I'm an embroiderer, and I work tiny. And I made a thing that's in the exhibition. It's that big, and it's taken me 2 days. But you get a real sense of time slowing down when you're sitting and you're working with textiles, because the process cannot be rushed if you're doing it by hand. So I think there's something in there, perhaps.
Just thinking in what the way that you start your question, I don't know, is I have the opportunity to work with a Penelope project, and with and I guess the first encounter was because this conception of the digital, the weave as an early digital technology, and we have the opportunity to work this loom at the exhibition tonight with Helen and Alex, and. One of the most important things was the reasoning and the way of the patterns are made in this case. But I want to say something about how the mothers, weavers, transmit the information to the kids. In the Andean world, when mothers start to her sons in the weaver's way, she said, you need to learn to weave. It's not another option, because you will have the opportunity to learn to think, to learn to order the world, and to learn how to resolve problems in the real world, in the world around. The way to order your thinking, and is the same way that you will resolve your tissue to your weave. So this knowledge is disappearing, and this importance to maintain this thing in structure as well is disappearing.
So like an embodied knowledge but whether embodied doesn't always is the right word. It's like kind of, yes, the body is able to reflect, but also to perform almost of its own accord.
Yeah, but at the same time, when you weave of that kind of technique, you are learning how to think in another way, and it's very interesting and realize that maybe the Andean culture is not writing or just oral culture as is a technological culture with technological transmission, because we have
yes.
so
It's interesting because, I mean, I know I'm not a weaver and I just look at this and I have to say I don't have that kind of capacity to see how it works. But one of the things, I mean, and that actually enables me to see what's so special about it, because it's more than pattern in some ways, it seems, because it's also to do with a capacity to understand the structure that underpins the pattern, which I think is actually quite a skill in itself. It can be applied to other situations.
And you have to be able to conceptualise it before you start weaving, because most half the job is in setting up the looms. So I've used the backstrap loom, but I've got a big 8 shaft, and it takes 2 days to warp it, and you have to already have in your head how the structure is going to work, because if you make one mistake there, the whole thing's gone. So yeah, it's that conceptual thing. But I think when you were talking about the way that the knowledge is passed on between generations, this is where I think why the maker culture as it exists in sort of the Western world at the moment is interesting, because we kind of had that break in hand skills through culture, and I think that's probably why this sort of rise of the maker movement, and to a certain extent sort of the rise of craft culture sort of back in the 70s and things. But what they didn't have in the 70s, because I've got a lot of those books and some of them are awful, what we've got now is YouTube. And I love a YouTube video. And that's why that sort of sharing of the knowledge into the sort of maker community I think is really important, because what we're doing is we're sharing community knowledge in ways like you would do if you sat around a table, but obviously you want to push it out wider than that, and we've got the technology now to be able to go. It's not perfect. I mean, I would rather teach somebody to weave sat next to them, or teach them to sew sat next to them, but failing that, a videos, trust me, is better than one of those 70s book illustrations. But I think that's really interesting that we're using these communities to sort of replace that sort of, we've had a break in the knowledge transmission, and we're now sort of trying to pull that back. At least that's what I'm trying to do. So.
Sandra was just telling me that she didn't make YouTube videos. Because we were just talking about these beads that she's wearing, and that when she had gone to the indigenous community that she worked with in Brazil, she'd taken some of the beads that she'd made, and she was kind of wanting as another thing that she could do in the community, to show them how they could make those beads, and then it wasn't happening and it wasn't happening. And the guys eventually said, but you know, just send us a YouTube video if you're doing it. Despite the fact that they were in a community that didn't actually have electricity. So whether they were charging their phones, I don't know. But yes, but you don't really like the YouTube thing.
Yeah, I would say I am here, I can do with you, but by YouTube now.
There is an art to making a YouTube video, so apologies in advance if you do actually watch any of mine. But it's very, actually making those things is actually really, really artificial, because in order to get the camera right, you're actually working in a way that you wouldn't work your hands normally, because you're trying to get camera in and do it slow enough to, so it's a bit of an artificiality, but you're trying to get something across. Actually writing instructions is really, really interesting as a way to sort of break down processes. So I'm going to write an Uber guide to cap sensing, because I think I've encountered pretty much every problem now with various different microcontrollers and doing it manually, and so yeah, but that's going to be a big task to sort of try and lay that out, and writing the instructions actually, because you do a lot of this stuff, especially sort of using textiles, because it's so it's so intuitive. You sort of, when you get all right at it, you get into the rhythm. And, but if you actually think about what you're doing when you're trying to explain it, you have to break it down so much. And it's really strange to think about what you sort of do automatically. Yeah.
Is it a good idea? Is this a good point to...
Yep.
David, you're going to do something at 1:30. Right. Do you want to just invite us, do you want to just tell us what you're going to do, or we're going to be back here, and you're going to do something. Something will happen at 1:30, and until then some lunch somewhere, we're not quite sure where. Oh, there's a big here.
And a round of applause for...
I'm sorry.
And I have a stack of mini looms. I'll put them here if anybody wants one.